All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Big Ben Fishing Report. Give it a few minutes, let some people hop on. See if I can. You got your phone? You can share it.
Yeah.
Some of your groups.
And it's still daylight out.
Yeah.
So I got to ask a question. As fishing guides and outdoorsmen, which time do you like better?
This.
Do you? Oh, I hate this time. I like it better light at 5 o'clock. It's still daylight out.
Yeah.
You better be sure.
Good.
I got
All right, y'all. I know some people are on here. I'm teaching hey man how to share stuff on Facebook. All right, go to group. There you go.
Okay.
Yeah, that'll work. Yeah. All right, give us just a few. We'll get going. All right, so we got a few people. Welcome to the April Big Ben Fishing Report. Captain Kenny Mullins.
Captain Michael Amen.
Captain Greg Duvall. Sorry about that, Mike.
That's all right. They can't hear him anyways.
Okay.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about current conditions, some future predictions, and talk about some tackle we've been using, some tactics, some water temperature, and so we'll just get started. I fished out of Keaton today. The water temp was started out about 78, got up to 81. I know you fished today, Greg.
Yeah, I fished up in Econfina, and we didn't have water that warm. The warmest I seen was 74, but like I said, with that south wind, it really turned the bite on for us good. We were able to throw top water almost all morning. That little bit of overcast came in, so we just kept with it, and it was a blast. The redfish were blowing them up. We didn't get a lot of trout. We had half a dozen trout, but we were in very tight to the edges. It seemed like every point that had any kind of rock on it had several reds around it, and even with the wind, they were coming up and blowing the top waters up.
Yeah, I've been throwing top water all week.
Mm-hmm.
Not all, walk the dog
Yeah.
baits. I've been throwing some floating kind of 27 MR profile, big Mirrodine profile, and it kind of does a live target, but it kind of does almost like a subsurface walk.
Yeah. Yeah, I think right now, because we're definitely into springtime, and the fish are, they've moved out of the creeks. Although I fished a tournament over the weekend with Joel Baldry and Steve Kovac, and we were in the creeks and did very well. Majority of the fish seem like they're on the outside, and they're very, like he told me the other night, you saw a lot of bait. There was bait everywhere today, even though the water's dark. There's just little glass minnows and pinfish and stuff, just mullet everywhere. And every time we found those three together, we caught a lot of fish.
Oh yeah. And so yesterday, I had a young boy on the boat that he hooked about a 27, 28 inch trout, got it right to the boat. It went under the boat and pulled the hook. I lost a 30 plus inch 10 feet from the boat the other day.
Yeah. I mean, it's all over Florida. I mean, I still have a lot of friends and stuff that, down in South Florida and Central Florida, and everybody's, the pictures that I'm seeing, everything is, what it should be right now in spring. We're beginning of April. The only thing I haven't seen that I'm used to seeing, is some cobia, but
so it's a little early for our area.
Yeah, and it's a little bit tougher to see them, with the water being so dark. Although from the last time I was out, the water, was probably it was last Saturday. The water is considerably lightened up. So I mean, you could, when the sun wasn't out, when the sun was out, I mean, you could see every hole, every sand hole, every rock. You could see it in 2-3 foot of water. And even when it, got overcast, you could still see all the, the sands, all the salt and pepper bottom, and where you needed to throw, you can make out all the oyster bars. So I think that has really, especially from Rock Island west,
Right.
it has really improved, for that area just because the water has lightened up. I know once you get on around the bend on the other side of the Acela and all that, the water really gets light over towards St. Mark's. But, our area just catches everything in the corner.
Yeah, pretty much from there to say, well, really Spring Warrior, that whole bend right there is pretty dark.
Yeah.
Now there's fish there.
Yeah.
It's pretty dark.
Yeah.
What about you, Mike? Where have you been fishing at? Tell me where you're catching them at.
Exactly.
I like Greg last Saturday. I fished a tournament they did, and I fished out of Keaton Beach that day, and probably caught 30, 40 keeper trout, about 6 of them over 20, and just couldn't land a good upper stock redfish. Lost a couple 10, 20 feet from the boat on some plastics and small suspended baits, and had them blowing up top water, following it a lot. Just weren't really in the mood for it. But that's what mainly fished the small plastics and all after that, and suspended plugs. And then I went to work in the grass line for the trout once the tide come in.
You couldn't find the cage I put the reds in for you?
No, you got to mark it with a buoy. I needed to find it.
I know who found it though.
Yeah, so today, like you said, the wind was
Yeah.
pretty
It started out nice. It wasn't terrible.
yeah, it started out nice, and we got out. I think we left the dock about 7:45. And by the time we got out fishing, started out good. And the first drift I was making on some reds, I had a mullet fisherman come in right in front of us, just hammering it, and it just blew that spot out. And so then I had to go on the hunt, and by the time I found them, it started blowing 20 plus, and so just really all I did is just power pole down and fan cast, and then pick them up, move,
that's exactly
30, 40 yards, power pole
We
down.
basically went structure to structure, hit every point and every, you could see where the rock piles were. So we just went to every one of them. And like I said, when you had, combination, when you had all the bait, you caught fish every time. When you had a combination, you usually, you caught a few. And then, it just seemed like there was, every time you'd move away, that, that south wind just kept going. So you'd get in, I called them cul-de-sacs, but you get in them little corners where the wind just blows it in there, and that bait would be in there, and you'd start seeing mullet jump.
Right where white birds are.
Yeah, well, yeah. But I mean, it was just game on. It was, when we used to tournament fish, we used to love the windy days because it'd blow everything into a corner.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, I got to fish a tournament Saturday, but it's on the East Coast.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I wish it was around here the way I'm on them right now.
I know. We got a guest.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so yesterday, right around the slack tide, we were at the tail end of our trip, and we caught a lot of fish, and we kind of just relaxing, taking a break, hit power pole down, and I look over and I said, holy crap. Had a school, it was about 20 fish, and every one of them was 30, 40 pound reds.
Wow.
Every one of them. They did not care anything about the boat being there. They also didn't care anything about anything we threw at it.
Yeah. It's weird because I haven't seen it up here at all yet. But from where I'm from, this time of year, if I ever seen really big oversized fish like that, I mean really big, like 40-inch fish, typically they were fish that had, and I was told this, they were fish that had come out of the spawning schools and were pretty much on their last leg, kind of like the salmon going up the stream. And, they really weren't interested in eating anything. They were just moving along until they expired, basically.
Yeah, and I'm pretty confident these fish came in with the bait. They were they were really bright, like silver.
Okay.
They weren't in
dark.
that water long.
Yeah, they weren't dark.
They just came in.
Yeah,
I believe. I can't say that obviously.
And I'm sure up here it's a little, because we had deep water near us down there. I mean, we weren't.
Right.
Up here you have so much shallow water that when that bait does move in, if you've got any of those big breeding fish out off the shore, they're like any other fish. They're gonna follow the food.
And I don't know about you guys, but when I find that mixture bait combination like you're talking about. I mean, I've seen pilchards, I've seen ballyhoo, mullet, obviously. So there's a good mix of bait pushing in, and the Spanish are pushing in with it.
Yeah, I noticed today I haven't fished out offshore at all. I've been right up against the edge the whole time. But I noticed there were several boats. Our warning guy. There were several boats sitting out, in probably 4 or 5 foot of water. And I figured with all the bait, I'm sure all that stuff has to start showing up. The crabber up in the area said he actually seen some triple tail today too. So
yeah, we get them early right in the Big Bend area. You get a little further west and a little further south, and it'll be about another month, and
yeah.
I mean, there's some there, don't get me wrong, but the bigger ones won't start pushing into later.
Yeah, and he said they were. I mean, I know all the ones I seen last year and last year before that were, I mean, hardly any keepers, but they're still fun to catch.
So we got a couple of questions. Tim Moody is asking, is there any debris in the Keaton Beach Canal? Yes, there is. But it is navigable. Right at the ramp, there's some metal roofing there. There's a dishwasher there that was not cleaned out. There's some lumber floating around. There's still stuff under the surface. You have to remember just how bad it was, and by contract, they're required to get at least 90%. And according to the surveys, they got what they say 95%. And although it looks like there's still a lot of trash and debris, I mean, with the amount of debris that there was,
yeah,
they did a good job.
Yeah, they did. And I mean, in those canals, you should be going slow anyway.
Right.
So, I mean, if you're going to take your time going out, and, once you get outside, up towards Econfina, I haven't seen anything.
No,
I've seen a few metal poles and all, like on the railroad tide, like toward the docks and all there used to be. But other than the middle, I haven't seen a whole lot. More like near the boat ramp and near the condos right now.
right. And out on the flats, I mean, there's some trees out there.
Around Hagen's Cove area.
There's a lot around Hagen's Cove. There's actually some big trees that are, watch it on a low tide. You don't want to run in tide if you don't know where they're at. Because there's some big trees that'll tear up some lower units if you're not careful. There's
around Hagen's to about Deacle Beach. There's some pretty good sized trees out around Deacle right now.
Yeah, and the channel markers. Let's see if I can bring some up. I need to.
And if you can get out and mark those trees when you're out there fishing right now, they aren't going to disappear anytime soon. So they'll be good structure for triple tail. I mean, cobia.
Make a good duck blind too. Yeah, make a duck blind. Give you any ideas.
They might last that long.
So I'm going to add a few pictures here where I can share with you guys. The Coast Guard did come out and they have put floating buoys on the markers that are missing. However, you guys can see there how far off of those.
They're mismarked.
Yeah, I mean they're so far off. I mean if you're not careful, at high tide you're not going to see that. I'll show you some other ones here, and then I mean look at this. There's I mean there's barely enough room for a boat to squeeze in between there. So be careful.
Yeah.
Be very careful,
Okay.
especially at a higher tide. A lower tide you can obviously see those beams, but
Yeah.
It's dangerous.
Yeah, and those should be taken out anyway, but they got to have the right boat to do it, I'm sure.
Yeah, and Kendall's asking how's the trout bite? Trout bite's been on fire. I will say, Steinhatchee to about I'd say Big Spring, the trout have they're on the move. The water's heating up fast and the trout are moving fast. I'm every day for trout, I'm moving 100, 200, 300, sometimes 500 yards out from where, I mean, they're moving quick. We have a cold front coming.
Yeah. And I noticed today, I caught, like I said, we stayed right in on the bank because we had high water the whole day. And we probably caught 6, maybe 7 trout. Now they were all good ones. They were all, 17 to 24-inch trout. However, again, I could see the boats that were out, and they were steadily drifting. They weren't moving around, jumping around. So I'm guessing they were catching fish. So, but a week ago we were catching fish in, I had one oyster bar where I could pull up and almost catch fish as many casts as I made. And
How's the trout bite been for you?
I've been pretty good. I'm moving out a little bit, like I said, but the last couple weeks I've been in 1.5 to 3 foot of water, and then pushing out a little bit now with the warmer water temperatures.
Yeah, I was catching them good 1.5 to 3 feet. Now they're getting out there fast.
yeah, I talked to a guy at the boat ramp. He said he was in like 5 foot, and they had limited out today. So
And again, that's relative to where you're at. I mean,
yeah,
you might be in a creek and 5 feet.
exactly. Yes, 5 feet off, he was out.
Right.
Yeah, and like I said, I would imagine you'd mentioned the cold front coming up, although it's not. They've readjusted the temperatures now. It's not going to get nearly as cold, but the north wind and the high pressure will send them into a bit of a tizzy.
Yeah, and we're looking at 35-mile-an-hour gust
Of
predictions right now, and
Of course.
I've seen the lows are in the 50s.
Yeah,
So it'll bring that water temp down a little, but
Yeah.
it's not going to.
it should actually help. It should kind of hold it where it's at, because you get these real bright sunny days and you get the south wind. That water temperature will climb 8-10 degrees in a day,
Right.
and you don't want it. We don't want 70, 80 degree or 80-degree water right now.
Yeah, and,
Not yet.
and that's where we're at in the Keaton area.
Yeah, so it needs to drop back down a few degrees.
Now the last couple of years we've had some pretty cold fronts in April, and it hurt the bait. I mean,
Mhm.
the bait was trying to come in, and then it got cold and it pushed it out. I don't think it's going to happen this time.
Yeah, no, the north wind will move it around and scatter it, and that's an April cold front was always the kiss of death when I was down south fishing full time, and you'd have bait, everything would be laid out. The snook were doing what they were supposed to do. The trout were there, and one cold front come through, and I mean it was everything was just gone. Bait would leave, snook would run.
Oh yeah. So what have you been catching them on?
I've been catching them on various slick baits, a lot of the pink color ones and peppermint, and some of the rip and slash 70s and scale sardine and live targets, and just a lot of the slow suspended stuff. And I fished a little bit of topwater last weekend, but I caught maybe 3 or 4 reds on it, but just a lot of following. They weren't really aggressive at hitting that, so I put it down and start throwing the plastics and everything, and went to catch a lot more fish till it warmed back up and everything.
Yeah. So where have you been fishing at?
Keeping about spring warrior. Been going out to Econfini a little bit, fishing.
Off the edge.
Kendall says not unfair. Well, you did mention rip and slash, so
Mhm.
Been throwing some of the hunter stick minnows, that clown color and hot orange. I've been fishing around Econfini way. That coffee and tea water over there.
So speaking of unfair, when are we going to see some lures?
In about 4 months, probably, we're supposed to have a shipment coming. And hopefully a lot of our arrowheads and everybody's popular red hots and copper color and pinfish and gold and black should be here pretty soon.
Just in time for you to start using pinfish under popping cord.
That cut bait.
Yeah. So, what's your thoughts on what's going to happen after this front?
It really, it's hard to say in April, because you never can trust the weatherman. So it really depends what we actually get out of it. If we do get a front that moves through us and the wind turns out of the north and the humidity and everything drops, it'll affect them. Yeah, I look at it from when we transitioned from all the airboat stuff to when the fish moved out of the creeks. We had 3 or 4 really solid cold fronts come through after that,
Yeah.
and they still didn't push back in.
No,
They wanted to be out there.
Yeah.
So a lot of fish, it's it's amount of light they have in a day as to where they're at. Just like any animal.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's going to change a lot. It'll change how we fish, only because you won't be able to access areas that we've been accessing right now. And if the fish can't swim there, they're obviously not going to be there. But instead of going in the creeks, I think they'll just pull out. I think it'll be like late fall.
So speaking of, Michael, the fish not being where they're at now, where they want to be, how would you approach that?
Probably look for you maybe offshore oyster bars and rock piles and move out to where you can find some structure and potholes and stuff out there where the fish push out to.
Yeah, typically what I do is I'll just, let's say I'm catching them in 2.5, 3 feet, I'm just pushing out the 2.5, 3 feet.
Mhm.
That's where they want to be.
Yeah.
You know, and
Yeah.
you know, it may not be straight out, but it's going to be, that's a
In the
good
area.
area to start is with the where you've been, the depth you've been
Especially
fishing.
if you can find some structure out in that area or some, salt and pepper bottom,
Right.
something an edge they can lay against. They'll find those areas, and that's where they want to be, in that area. And the thing I always look for too, and I noticed it today a lot, when we got in an area that had a lot of mullet, we caught fish, but when the water's low, I always try and start where I see the most mullet working, in that depth. That's where I always, whether it be 10 inches or 10 foot,
That's right.
wherever I see the mullet, because most of the time, not so much on the trout, but the redfish are always going to be around those mullet. And the trout will too, especially the big trout.
And the big mullet.
Yes. Yeah. Not the little,
So,
not the little silvers,
Right.
the big girls, the ones that you can actually hear when they jump.
I was seeing a bunch of silver mullet last week around Keaton Beach and
Mhm.
saw a bunch, not big trout, but good upper slot trout mixed in there with them.
And that's the thing too, is, your big trout is mixed in there with those redfish, and it's, they're
The same fish.
they're eating the same food.
Yep.
And the thing I find is, if I'm in there and I'm working fast, I'm catching the reds.
Mhm.
If I can slow down and not have a red eat it, I'm catching the trout.
Mhm. Yeah, those big trout are always loners. I mean, you'll catch 2 or 3 in an area, but you won't catch them like you catch the 17-inch trout, where it's, you throw in the same hole and it's one after another. Those big trout, it seems like you'll catch one out of this hole, one on the next point. They very rarely lay in the same area.
And don't be afraid to throw a big bait for those big.
Yeah, so
If
we
you sit by.
we used to always, again, reverting back to my past life, in the spring, especially when we net bait, we call them horse minnows, but they were just big pilchards.
Yep.
I mean, the biggest pilchards I could get. Obviously, I wanted them for snook, but I wanted them for the trout, because you'd throw a 2 or 3 inch pilchard, trout wouldn't touch it. You throw a 5, 6 inch out there, I mean, it get hit as soon as it hits the water. And it's the same, it's the same fish up here. Use a big top water, because I actually switched today. I had a small, I was using a little skitter walk, and the reds ate it. I mean, they were just knocking the crap out of it. And I broke a hook on it. So I went to a big top dog, and the first 3 casts were, I caught one of them, and the other, I could see them because I was in my tower. They came up and flashed on it, were all big trout.
Yeah.
So the reds did eat it, but the trout really, they just want big baits this time of year.
Yeah, like a big spook, big one knocker.
Mhm. Yeah. Even we like the 17 Mirrodine, but even those bigger Mirrodines are, I mean, you'll catch bigger trout on them.
Yeah, and I think people in our area overlooks the double XL
Mhm.
Mirrodine.
Yep.
And I have quite a few of them for snook fishing,
Mhm.
and I work them different when I'm snook fishing, but I think it gets overlooked, and everyone looks at the 17 and the 27. So you get that double XL on them big trout, even redfish. I mean,
Yeah. And I mean, the little trout will hit them too. It's harder to hook them on those big baits.
right.
But those big trout, if if that 17 goes by, he may just look at it. If that double X goes by, he's going to eat that. He's
Right.
going to try to. And the only thing I don't like about any big bait is just the weight of it on my rod.
Right.
Because typically we're using lighter tackle. So when you get a big heavy bait on there, it feels like you're carrying a cannonball around on the end of it sometimes. So that's my main reason that I don't use a lot of big baits all the time. It's just,
Yeah, like I said, I have them for snook.
Yep.
When I'm going after snook, and they want a big bait.
Yeah.
And you work that. You could take that double XL, and I straight reel it fast.
Mhm.
And even then, like, not that we have a lot of snook. We do have snook in the Big
We
Bend
do.
region, in the southern part of the Big Bend region. And one thing I like is it's the Glow 6-inch like fluke.
Mhm.
I'm trying to think of what company it is.
A couple of them make them.
Yeah, I
Gamblr
can't think
makes
of which
one.
one.
Assassin makes us 6.
No, this is Mirror. No, it's not Mirror.
Yeah, he don't make a glow.
Anyways, it's a 6-inch fluke and with the Z-Man redfish eye jig head.
Mhm.
And work it like you're walking the dog, and it darts back and forth with that jig head. I put a different jig head on, it doesn't do it,
Yeah.
just that action.
Yeah.
So if you are in the southern region, you're targeting snook, that's a good bait.
Oh, yeah.
Hard to beat.
Yeah. And you always want to work them fairly quick because you don't want to give snook a chance to look at it.
Right.
If it's not live bait and they look at it, that's all they'll do is look at it.
Yeah, and actually, in our area where probably most of the people viewing are fishing, I even do that with redfish this time of year. I'll straight reel a Myridine.
So my father-in-law was on the boat with me this morning, and I had hooked a redfish, and I was going to hand him the rod, so he was just burning. He had a paddle tail on. We were working like a jerk bait, and he just started burning it in. And before he could get in, another red came across, and just smoked it. I don't know how he caught it, but he caught up to it and ate it. But I could see him coming the whole way.
Yeah, in fact,
So
it was
they're not afraid to chase.
second week of April. I think it was the second week of April last year. I had a group. They're coming the same week this year, and we were all over the redfish, and I could not get them to eat. There was 4 of us on the boat. We were all fishing nonstop, myself included, and we're just seeing, a couple hundred redfish that day. I'm like, so I don't know what else to do. They're just not eating anything, even live bait. They would not eat. I'm like, so finally, I just got frustrated. I threw my topwater out there, and I was just ripping it as fast as I could coming back.
Yeah.
And next thing you know, just bam, bam. So we tied topwater on everyone's and just reeling as fast as we could, and they were just hammering on it.
Yeah.
So
They're just
sometimes
reacting
it
to
changes.
it.
Yeah, that reaction bite, and
Mhm.
they were just killing it. So
Yeah, and I think this time of year, especially, they come out of those creeks where they've just been nose down, just picking at shrimp and crabs and worms and that kind of stuff. That redfish don't look up often, but I think they this time of year they do because they're looking for a change in their diet.
right.
It's like after we eat salads all week, I'm ready for a steak. If something comes through, I'm going to chase it if I got to get it. But
Yes. So we have a question here, which we kind of been talking about baits. It says, what are we throwing this month? So I primarily artificial.
yeah, and for me, if I get out there and even with clients, most clients, if I have somebody that absolutely cannot figure out how to work a topwater, I'll put a, like you said, a 5 or 6 inch jerk bait on there and just put it on a regular, rigging hook or a Texas worm hook or something like that, and just have them twitch it. I don't even tell them, don't worry about what it's doing. Just real slow and just count 1, 2, 3, 4, stop.
Yep.
And they're gonna get something to hit it. But if it's nice weather and slick, I'm always gonna try and use topwater, just because it shows you where the fish are, and you can kind of you can get a judge for the rest of the day on how aggressive the fish are gonna be.
And see, that's something that doesn't get talked about a lot. Is a lot of times I'll throw topwater, not so much because they're going to eat it, but
To find them.
they may roll on it. You may see them follow it. You're gonna, you'll see some activity. Then I can change it up from there.
Yeah, and a thing I used to do it when I was tournament fishing, but when we started doing other charters too, is I would work a topwater, and sometimes I'd have hooks in it, sometimes I wouldn't, depending on who was with me. But you get the fish to come up and roll on it and get them aggressive, and then just fire right in behind it, and just no matter what you got, whether it's a jig, a Myridine or anything like that, that fish will turn and eat right away. And we did it in tournaments because we wanted to get the single hook in them rather than the treble hook.
Right.
So we would find fish, then we could catch them on the hook we wanted to catch them on. with clients, you're just finding the fish.
Right.
You know, you're seeing it, you see the explosion, and if they can hit within 5 feet of it, they're going to catch that fish.
And that's something I do a lot. Is I'll have, especially this time of year when I get around a lot of redfish, I'll have like a 5-inch, a big paddle tail,
Hmm.
or like a Z-Man diesel minnow, or
Yeah.
a Die Dapper,
Yeah.
saltwater assassin. I'll have that rigged up on their rods, and I'm going to throw top water. I'm going to work it pretty quick, almost too quick where I won't
Yeah.
hook them. And I'll just say, be ready.
You'll see them.
A couple of y'all fish, and one of y'all be ready.
Hmm.
Because
Yeah.
as soon as you see it, cast behind me,
Mhm.
bring it to it.
Yeah.
What about you?
Depending on what area I'm fishing, if I'm fishing around Keaton or say you can finish that hallway, a lot of times in the morning time I'll start throwing a top water and they throw like a chartreuse color skid or walk, and once the sun comes up I'll start throwing a chrome color one, and I'm still gonna throw a lot of the stick baits, and until that water warms up, and like a lot of both of y'all said, I'll probably have people throwing plastics and then kind of show them how to fish that some, and then if they can throw the hard fish good, have them throw some bender plugs. And I mean, I've got some want to come fish some top water in a week or two. Hopefully this front shouldn't affect them much, but I mean, it's not going to drop down like it was a couple weeks ago. We had a frost a couple weeks ago. So it should hopefully keep the bite pretty good still, and then we'll eventually start moving out with the pop from corks and plastics and get out in the flats fishing with those pretty soon.
Yeah, that
Once it starts warming up some more,
probably by
about around May or so.
yeah, that's what I was gonna say. About the end of April and into May, it'll be Pat McGriff fishing time.
When our floating grass shows up.
I'll fight it all the way.
Yeah. Yeah. Speaking of Pat, he
Yep.
was not able to make it tonight. He has some stuff going on that I'll let him tell you guys whenever he comes back. But we missed having him here. And not that we don't want you here, Mike. But I
Pat's
can
just got good stories.
I will tell you, I'll go ahead
Tell
and
us a story.
give Pat's advice. What he will be throwing this month
Mm.
is live pinfish under a popping cork, under a Cajun Thunder, and some assassin if he has people that can do it. But for the most part, it's gonna be live pinfish in 4 to 6 feet of water under a Cajun Thunder,
Without a doubt. And he'll catch fish on it every
and it
time.
works.
Yep.
It works.
I think my favorite story when I was working with Pat over at Keaton there during the cleanup was, and I heard it about 4 times, and I love you, Pat, but I heard it like 4 or 5 times of how he would bet his clients that you could catch eight pinfish in a minute, baiting the hook.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah.
And I was like, why? He just looked at me.
Yeah.
But no, he's a good guy. He's good at what he does for sure.
Yeah, I will be throwing some popping corks now. Honestly, last year I didn't use as much live bait as I would in years past, and honestly, it's just because I finally realized I'm catching as many fish
Mm-hmm.
without doing it.
Yeah, and I feel for me with clients, especially if you have clients that can do it, and they can catch fish doing it. It's obviously for us it's an easier day, and it's not about being easy, but it keeps everybody engaged because
Right.
you're not throwing a bait out there and just holding it and waiting.
Yeah.
You're working that lure, and at the end of the day, it's kind of funny, especially the guys and girls that get the hang of how to work the top waters and the twitch baits. It becomes fun for them because they watch that thing and they just it's something different that they've never done. And again, it makes the day go by much easier and much faster.
More of a reaction instead of waiting for the cork to go under.
Exactly.
Right.
They feel like they've actually enticed that. It's still saying fool them, don't feed them.
Right.
But and there's times where there's no way around it. You have either really young kids or it just doesn't work.
Well, it's like the young boy I had on the boat today. They've been on other charters. They were talking about going to the Keys and going to other places, Anna Maria, stuff like
Mhm.
that, where they're typically throwing live bait.
Culture, yeah.
Oh yeah, a lot of pilchards. And he was talking about that, but at the end of the day, it wasn't his exact words, but he felt it was more rewarding.
Yeah, that's the word I was looking for a little bit ago. It is. I mean, it's a sense of accomplishment. You know, you've actually made that fish eat a piece of plastic that he would never eat.
And like you said, it wasn't as boring.
Yeah.
Because you're constantly
You're always
doing
doing
something.
something. Yeah.
You know, and like, you know,
They
don't get me wrong. I'll
they
fish.
enjoy it more.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I said, I'll soak bait with the best of them.
Yeah.
If it's needed.
And we did it this past Saturday, and I mean, I actually did it for a little bit. I used 2 shrimp. Joel's gonna say I'm lying, but I counted. I only used 2 shrimp. But they were using shrimp, and they caught more fish than I did. There's no doubt. But you know, I mean, I caught the trout we weighed, and I caught both trout we weighed actually. So
Yep. And typically you're going to catch those more quality fish in our area. You're going to catch the quality fish on the artificial. I feel because you're covering more.
yeah. You're gonna catch. That's the main reason I think you catch more fish is because you're not sitting. You know, as guides, we fall into a rut where it's like, okay, I know there's fish in this hole, so I'm going to sit here until these fish decide to eat. You know, so we fall in that rut of getting stuck there, and after an hour, maybe they're not in this hole. You know, where if we'd have been throwing artificials, we'd have moved right on through there and gotten to a point where, you know, we probably would have found some other fish that we might not have.
You know, talking about that, where a lot of people make mistakes too, though, is on the flip side, is leaving an area too soon.
We're moving too fast.
And right. So just the other day, we were out fishing and I knew the fish were there and they weren't eating. But you see all the boats zooming all over the place. So I explained to my client, I said, look, you know, we can go to another spot, but the fish are here. And all these boats keep pulling up. They see me, they keep pulling up. They're not catching fish. They're going to move on. And if I keep moving with them and then they see me come back, they're going to come back with me. If I just stay here and they're going to move on, they're going to get out of sight. These fish are going to eat.
Yeah.
You know, and so a lot of times we're our own worst enemies because we're moving, chasing fish.
Too much.
Yeah, we're chasing fish that aren't eating.
Yeah, and if you see, you know, obviously you pull up and you see fish, you see reds tailing, you see reds swimming or trout on an oyster bar, you know they're there and see them there, then you just kind of, they're not eating. I always just kind of, okay, if I got tied, okay, am I at a bad angle on them? Is there just something they don't like? And you're going to adjust off of that. But, I've always been, even when I was using live bait and pilchers and stuff, if I pull into an area and don't get bit, I know they're there and they just don't want to eat. I catch myself doing that all the time. Just move on down, just keep moving.
Yeah.
You're going to, the old adage, you're going to find something eating somewhere most of the time.
It's like a couple of days ago, I pulled into a spot, the fish had been there. And I mean, literally as soon as I sat down, started my drift, I had 6 boats within 100 yards of me. And I said, okay, these fish are not going to eat like this. So I left. And I left and I went just out of sight of that spot and I started seeing everyone leaving. I said, all right, I'm going to give it about a half hour and I'm going to go right back in. We went right back to that spot and it was every other cast.
Yeah. I think what a lot of people get in a bad habit of doing too, and I do it, is trying to fish too fast, especially when they're throwing artificials and get on the trolling motor and go. And, we all watch all the guys on TV and everything, and, the trolling motor's on high and they're just as fast as they can cast. It doesn't work like that in saltwater. I mean, you've got to give each spot a chance. And I always say, like if the wind and the tide are carrying you too fast to make at least 3 or 4 casts on each spot that you're wanting to fish, just drop the anchor, put the poles down, whatever, however you need to stop and do it. I mean, we had, you were out there today, we had 20, 25 mile an hour south winds, which for me was perfect because it blew me straight down the bank. So I would just blow down, I'd put the poles down, we'd cast the whole area, then I'd move up and, we hooked a fish, I'd stop and, we did it that way. We didn't just keep going. Every time it looked like there should be fish in the area, I stopped it so we could make sure there wasn't, because otherwise you're only going to get 1, maybe 2 casts through that area. And one of those casts is going to be bad because you're going to be at a weird angle, throwing across the wind or something because you're already by it.
Right.
So if you just slow up to that point, you know, and cover the area. You know, you don't have to sit on it for 2 hours, but just cover the area and move in. You know, you're gonna, you know, we always do it every time you leave. You always see fish
Oh yeah.
that didn't bite, but you know, that's
But it's like this morning, you know, talk about getting into a rut all week. I've been drift. Well, we were what?
couldn't
Probably,
drift today.
we were probably 23, 24 gusts.
Oh yeah, it was blowing.
So I'm drifting, and I put the drift sock out, which slowed me down. And we were drifting 1.9,
Yeah,
and it slowed me down to about 1.1.
mm-hmm.
But you know, we're drifting along, and I only had one person fishing. You know, he was casting. I look down, and I see mud clouds. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
dang, we blew these reds right out.
Yep.
We were moving so fast, and I was like, all right, well, they want to be there.
Yeah, they'll come back.
I you know, kept drifting through, circled back around, and I came back, and you know, I marked where they were, and I started a couple 100 yards out. I power poled down. We fan casted, picked them up, moved 50 yards, power poled down, and started working it slower, and then we started catching them.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, and that's one thing I see people. That's a mistake I see a lot of people make, is they're drifting along, and it's not as big a deal with the guys that are using a push pole, but guys with the trolling motors, which I do both. But they'll get going along, and all of a sudden they'll see those fish right there, and it's too late to, you know, you're on top of them. Instead of just drifting through them quietly, just let the boat drift. They'll hit that trolling motor and try and loop back around immediately. And you know, the trolling motor noise, you know, makes a lot of noise underwater. Even, you know, even the moves, you know, they're dead silent, but you can still hear that whir underwater. And then you stir the bottom. You've got a 23, 24 foot boat swinging around, making a lot of, you know, water noise, and those fish are just going to leave. You know, they're not gonna hang out. Whereas if you just drift through them, get down past them 100 yards, you know, you can crank your big motor and idle out and circle back to them if you want to.
Right.
At that point, you know, those fish, they'll back away from the boat and the noise that when it's drifting over, but they won't run. You know, just like deer in the woods.
Yep.
Don't spook them and you're good.
So we got a question from Got Time Charters. Amy, I'll let you start with this one. He asked, so a question, this is something I seem to struggle a little bit with. If I am by myself or with my brother, I can catch reds sometimes. But when you have clients on the boat, like 3, how is the best method you all have found as far as setting the boat up for them to catch reds?
Like say checking your wind where you want to drift at, and try to put position in the boat, and probably have a lot of them throwing either spoonless or plastics, and usually pretty good search bait for both of those. And until you locate them and everything, and a lot of fish in your potholes and say your oyster bars and rocks and everything until you locate some. But most of what I've been finding right now has been in your potholes and sand holes, and finding some and your points and stuff. I've been power pulling down a lot of places like blind casting, like you were saying, and where I saw fish stirring up the mud and everything, and I'll power pull down and make 10 or 20 casts out there, and then I'll pick up my pole and move again. And say if I got a couple people on the boat, if they can fish pretty good, I'll put them on the bow of the boat, and then we'll keep fishing the area, and then we'll pick up the pole, move, say another 50, 100 feet, and we'll pull down again if we know the fish are there. And if we don't find it, we'll try to move it to another spot and just keep moving around.
What about you, Greg?
The one thing I always tell clients, especially when I was using live bait, is always don't try and feed the fish, just let them find it.
Right.
You know, so, you know, whether that means casting 10 feet, 15 feet up current from them and letting that bait come to them. You know, don't try and land where, you know, if you're fishing this point right here, don't land on that point. You know, get your clients to throw up from it and drift down through it. And then even if you know they're right there, if you get just past it, the same with the boat, let it sweep on past them before you bring it in.
Right.
Because any commotion puts fish on guard. And just with clients, I remember when I first started, I would, you know, I couldn't sleep at night worried about clients catching fish, when the one thing we cannot control is whether that fish is going to bite or not. So, you know, you have to manage expectations of your clients. You get in there, you know, we're going to see these fish. We're going to, you know, this is what we're going to do. But again, if you do everything right, you know, especially with live bait and most artificials, especially in this Big Bend area, these fish are, you know, relatively cooperative.
Oh, yeah.
You know, if you approach them the right way, you know, come in with the wind, come in on a trolling motor, set up so you can let baits, you know, so you can fish the areas correctly. So you're not, you know, you're not bringing the bait into the current. You want the bait coming with the current. You know, if you can fish everything like that, you're going to catch fish most of the time, and so are your clients. It's just, you know, the areas you want to fish, you got to learn how to fish them yourself.
That's right. And, you know, for myself, probably, I mean, my go-to for reds with clients is going to be a Gold Spoon. It's easy to work. I mean, just cast in real time.
Yeah.
And unless you use Pat's praying method or bowing method, I should say bowing method. But I just cast and reel,
Yeah.
you know, so if I have 3 people on the boat and I got 3 spoons out there, we're covering a lot of water fast.
Yeah.
You know, it's a search bait,
Yeah.
you know,
And no treble hooks.
right. No trouble hooks. It's easy for them,
Yeah.
you know, and that's the thing. And I mean, it's a 30-year-old lure that works.
Yeah. And the thing with artificial is the problem I always have with clients is they don't feel the hit. They don't know what, you know, with live bait, they feel it just pull. You know, with an artificial, a lot of times you don't get that. You get a little tap on it, or you get a fish swimming at you. So after they catch that first fish and they feel it and they realize what they're actually feeling for, it makes a world of difference too. So, you know, whether you hook one and hand it to them the first one so they know what they're going to feel, or, you know, that it just happens for them that way. Once they get the hang of it, you know, they're going to be able to do it without any problem. But, you know, sometimes as guides, we stress out over the number of fish that we're catching when it really doesn't matter. People want to have a good time, and, you know.
Well, it's like the kid today, he's used to catching bass and you know, panfish, freshwater, specks and all that. So he didn't know what to expect on a redfish.
Right.
So he's throwing some, he's like, well, what's it going to feel like? I said, honestly, it's going to feel when they hit it and they don't get it, it's going to feel like you tapped a rock.
Mm-hmm.
I said, but when they bite it, you'll know.
Yeah.
I said, I don't know how else to explain. You'll know.
Yeah, he'll be there.
And he said, well, do I have to set the hook? I said, it'll set the hook for you. Just real. You know, that's another reason why I like a Gold Spoon, or like I said, a big 5-inch paddle tail this time of year, just reeling it, maybe twitch every now and then.
Yeah. And once they get it, they got it. Typically, if they're eating those baits, they're, you know, I know most spoon redfish are hooked. Very rarely are they hooked right in the lip. They're hooked usually in the roof of the mouth or in the tongue.
Right.
You know, they're eating it.
So, I mean, that's my advice. I mean, it's hard to beat it, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like I said, you just got to learn the spots you're fishing and the fish you're fishing and how they like to set up in those areas. I mean, we all have our favorite spots, and
know your ties when to fish into
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you got to know, you know, if fish is going to set on the left or the right side of the oyster bar as to how the tide's going, and then you can set your boat up accordingly to be able to fish it most efficiently.
And a lot of, like you said, depends on where you're fishing. Like if I'm down in Cedar Key or Swanee, you know, I don't do a lot of drifting.
Right.
You know, when I hit, you know,
Spot
even
fishing.
some of Horseshoe, I'm more spot fishing. And, you know, as I move up into, you know, Steinhatchee, Keaton Beach, Spring Warrior, all the way pretty much to, I'd say Fenn Holloway, or I should say Big Spring. I'm doing a lot of drifting.
Yeah.
Even for my reds, I'm doing a lot of drifting.
And I think the difference between those areas is once you get up above, we'll say Keaton, up above Spring Warrior, you have every 50 foot, you've got another point.
Yeah.
You know, where
A
you
lot of
don't-
creeks.
Yeah, you don't have that when you get farther south. You have creeks, but they're spread out, so you have just long stretches of uninterrupted shoreline.
Right.
Where up here, you know, from Spring Warrior to Acela, you know, like I said, there's a point or an oyster bar every 50 foot.
Rocks or
Yeah.
bars compared to Keaton, where there's a few scattered
Grass.
rocks everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. So it makes a difference. And, you know, there's a definite difference in how you fish those areas.
And talking about, you know, letting the bait drift by the fish, you know, clients that have fished with me for triple tail, you know, they've got to see it firsthand, because
Oh, yeah.
you cast on top of that triple tail, it's over.
Take
You know, if you're lucky, they'll go straight down, and you can put,
Yeah, give
throw
them a second, they'll come
jig
back.
head down to them, or you give them some time. Most time I'll just leave and I'll
Yeah.
come back and
Yeah.
they'll be there. But when I can show them, first thing I do is I'll put the cork out there and I'll show them, hey, this is how it's going to
Mhm.
drift. So then I said, okay, you want to cast at least 10 feet away from it and let it drift into it. And then when they could see that and watch the fish come up and eat,
Yeah.
the problem is they see the fish eat and they want to just.
They're too anxious.
Let me tell you, Triple Tail, you better not do that.
No, that's too anxious.
Um,
I mean, even when we used to, and then I've done it here when the water's nice and clean, you see the fish. If you're drifting the bait through, you see that fish come up, and even if you're using artificial, you'll see him come up to hit it. And your first reaction is to tighten up on him, and all you're doing is jerking the bait away from him. And it's hard to do. And like I said, especially if you can see them, Triple Tail, or if you just let them eat it, they're gonna eat it.
Oh yeah, Kobe is another one.
Yeah.
I mean, I do the same thing with Kobe. If I know they're on this certain piece of structure, I like to drift it to them.
Mhm.
They're pretty stupid fish. I mean, but,
Yeah, the one trick with cobia because we did where I'm from originally. I mean, March and April, all I did was cobia fished, and we had the luxury of they follow the stingrays around down
Yep.
there, so we would follow them and sight cast them all day. And I'd always tell everybody when we throw out, because we use live bait a lot of times for that, is that when he comes up and eats it, if he is facing you, do not. I said just real slow. I said when he turns to the side or turns away from you, then real hard.
Yep.
Because if he's coming at you, they have an uncanny ability to just open their mouth and spit out whatever's in it, and you will every time miss them. But if they turn to the side or go straight away, you'll get them every time.
that's right. All right, so we got another question for you. Hey man, how is the creek fishing Keaton Steinhatchee looking for this next week?
Yeah, I've been fishing in the creeks, man. If you want to use a shrimp and everything, the creek fishing is pretty good over there. And find your little troughs and all in the creek and fish around your oyster bars in there. You can find some live shrimp or cut mullet. But you can also, like I said, artificial bait with your plug and get around them creek mouths, and you should find your redfish and trout, I think, around the creek mouths and around the grass line still right there.
So honestly, the next, 4 or 5 days, if you're going to fish, you better get in the creek somewhere and get it out of the wind.
Yeah, yeah,
There's always fish in there.
yeah.
Especially your redfish and sheephead. Still a few sheephead in there, and still quite a few
Black
trout.
drum.
Flounder too.
Yeah, flounder.
Today was the first day, and the only reason was I didn't throw a jig all day, which is very strange for me. But I didn't throw a jig all day. That's the only reason we didn't catch a flounder. But for the last month and a half, we've been wearing the flounder out. Not huge numbers, but 4 or 5 every trip.
Right.
Which they were all good. Good size keeper size fish.
Right.
Yeah. So
I've been catching some myself.
yeah.
I haven't been fishing the creeks, but so I guess it was mid-April last year. We had a week like we're about to have with all this wind, which Brandon Odom was talking about. Are we going to have a weekend where the wind isn't 10 plus mile an hour?
Not this weekend.
But
No.
So
They
we
don't
had the
exist
same thing.
anymore.
I had some folks come from Charleston, South Carolina, and they're coming again in 2 weeks.
Mhm.
And the wind was literally, I think it was gusted 39 miles an hour, and they came from Charleston. They only had 3 days to fish. They're
go
like,
try
"What are we
it."
gonna do?" I said, "We're gonna go fish." And I got way back in the creek, and we were throwing jigs, and we threw some shrimp, and I mean we had a ball. I mean we probably caught 20 redfish.
Yeah.
So the fish are always in there.
They are, yeah. Especially, I mean, if you just want to bend a rod, you take a jig head with some shrimp and drag it through any of those corners in any of those creeks, you're gonna, they may be all 12 or 14 inches, but you're liable to catch 30 of them.
Right.
Which like I said, I mean, when fishing's fishing, I mean, anybody doesn't like catching 30 fishes just needs to play golf.
Especially you got some kids on the boat too.
Yeah.
Catching 30 fish and they're enjoying it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and you're gonna catch some big ones.
Yeah, yeah, you'll get
Even in
some
the
big stuff.
dead heat of the summer, you know, a lot of people stays out of the creeks, but there's still fish in there.
Oh, yeah.
Redfish,
You know,
so I got the redfish and drum in there still.
Yeah.
That's where they live. I mean, they're not gonna when the water comes up. I mean, they'll slide in there because it'll cool off back in there.
Especially some of the spring-fed creeks.
Mhm.
So Jason Johnson says, "Where are y'all getting live shrimp?" So actually, Jared Keaton Beach Bums, he has live shrimp. He got them in yesterday. Was it this morning?
I think it was today. I saw
Yeah, this morning they got shrimp tanks. You know, they got their food truck out there. They do have some merchandise in
I saw the pictures.
container there,
So
and they got live shrimp and they have fiddler crabs because the sheephead are, you know, offshore. The sheephead bites pretty good.
So we went when we went out riding around the day before that tournament with Tanner on his new airboat, and he had gotten some fiddler crabs that he was going to use for redfish. And I was kind of joking around with him a little bit, and he came up to me and turned to me, and goes, "Caught redfish on those fiddler crabs." So don't ever discount crab. I knew he would. I mean,
Oh yeah,
my favorite bait overall for redfish is creek chubs. If you can find a creek chub, and any place you can get them, you will catch more redfish. You know what to do with them creek chubs.
yeah, and that's something I use quite a bit if I'm fishing down around Swanee, especially.
Yeah, little mud minnows and chubs.
Yeah, especially them tiger.
Oh yeah, tiger chubs.
Oh yeah, tiger chubs, and they work here, and we have them here.
Yeah, well, the thing is, I mean, growing up, and you grew
Oh,
up
yeah, we
in
grew
Pasco
up,
too. I mean, we'd go and just walk those edges and catch all those tiger chubs, and we'd catch every. I mean, the only thing we really didn't catch on them was snook.
Right.
It's the only thing I could never really get. They'd eat them, but not like they do a pilchard. But the redfish, flounder would eat them creek chubs like no tomorrow. But I never see anybody using them up here. And I
We've
see
got
up
them. We've got a
here.
bunch of them.
Yeah, I see them all the time.
Yeah, it's yeah, probably for snook, it's hard to beat pilchard and mullet.
Yeah,
You know.
yeah.
And we used to have you probably heard that wade fisherman down there, St. Mark's, that Gary Dros. He catches the mud minnows and
Mm-hmm.
goes in there wading around that stony bayou and catches big flounder,
Yeah,
redfish.
that as a kid, that was the only live bait we ever could catch. So that's what we used, and
Oh yeah,
we caught some fish on them. And I swore when I moved up here, I was never throwing cast net again for bait. But,
that's what I said.
That's what he does.
yeah,
And I haven't.
Yeah.
I say
if I see a big group of mud minnows somewhere, though, I
yeah,
might break that promise.
yeah. So I used to hit Trouble Creek.
Yep.
Yeah, Trouble. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Any man's like, I don't even know where Trouble Creek is.
Yeah.
but-
Oh yeah.
I've
All
caught
Green
Creek
Key,
down there.
Trouble
Green
Creek.
Key, Trouble Creek, any of the canals up in Hudson. Yeah, we just walk down and get all the mud minnows we can get.
All right, here's another question for A-Man. What rod do y'all recommend for a rattling redfin? I feel like the medium heavy fast is too stiff and tears out those small treble hooks.
I can get a little variation now with different rod companies, but I'm mainly using a medium action. Well, I used fish barrel rods, but I'm using medium action and some medium light one. I got one of their saltwater series. I'm using both of those for my stick minnows and lighter jerkbait plugs and all.
Yeah, I wish the fishing industry would be more standardized.
Universal.
Yeah, it's you get one rod company and a medium heavy is a broomstick, and you get another company medium heavy is like a
Quick.
yeah.
Yeah.
You know,
The one thing I've always, so a lot of the companies now, they'll go like medium action with like a fast tip. Yeah. So the difference, so I always compare like a live bait rod has a big parabolic bend. When you set the hook, the whole rod bends. The rods I like for artificials, twitch baits and all that kind of stuff, just the tip will bend.
right.
And you have more control over the bait. You have more control over the cast, and your reaction time is a lot bigger or a lot quicker. When you set the hook, the only thing bending is that tip, not the whole rod. So it's, to me, when I'm using artificials, almost all my rods that I use for artificials all have a very fast tip. I have live bait rods, and like I said, it's almost a difference between using monofilament and braid is what they feel like.
Yeah.
When you really, get the rods in your hand, one feels like it stretches and the other is just right there. And that's for those kind of, I wouldn't use heavy for anything here outside of maybe tarpon, but medium, medium light, any of that stuff. It just, with lures, I think it's just got to have a fast tip.
Yeah, so right now I'm using Bubba rods, and I've been very happy with the Bubba rods. I do have, I have a few medium heavies popping corks,
Yeah. I mean, something where you're pulling, again, that, like we talked about earlier with the big baits, if you're throwing those big double X Mirrodines, you almost need a medium heavy rod.
Right.
Otherwise, your rod is always doubled up while you're just reeling the lure in.
Like super spooks and all. I think I like a medium heavy actually.
Yes.
Throwing out.
Yeah. Just so you got, you've got some resistance to the weight of the lure.
And like right now, I mean, going in the next few weeks, we're going to start seeing some of those cobia trickling in, and it's going to be a good idea if you're drifting along trout fishing. You should be casting the way that the direction you're drifting. It's not a bad idea to have a pinfish under a popping cork on a medium heavy rod out the back.
Yeah.
But overall, I typically use a medium. What now is asking about rod length. What rod length do you guys prefer?
All mine are at least 7 foot or better. Most 7 to 7.4.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, most companies will start making like a 7.2 or 7.4, and that's a sweet spot. I mean,
most of mine are 7.6,
Mhm.
and the reason why is because I get a lot of people that can't cast.
Yeah.
And having that 7.6 it gives you a little more distance on your cast.
Yeah.
A little bit shorter 7-footer, you're gonna have more accuracy, especially when you're trying to hit an exact spot on a point, or you're fishing in a creek, and you gotta have a little more accuracy with that.
And the thing, I remember too, when you go, the longer the rod, so when we're going back to the the live bait bend and the artificial bend, the fast and the parabellum, the longer the rod, the less, it's gonna sound weird, the less fast it can be.
Right.
So like I think that's why probably both Mike and me like that 7.2 to 7.4, because it still gives you a little bit of length to be able to really sling it, but it also keeps that top end tight.
And I do prefer a 7 to a 7.2, 7.4.
No, I completely get what you're saying though, because you get people, you give them a 7-foot rod, they can throw it from here to that wall. You give them a 7.6, they can throw it from here to the other end of the house.
Right.
And for whatever reason, I don't know, but it's the way it works.
Using a lot of that light braid too. Depending on what lure, I'm using a 10 to 15 pound, and we'll beef up a leader like with mackerel and bigger fish, will be tarpon and everything. But generally 15, 20 pound mono or fluorocarbon leader, depending on what your lures and all you throw on. But
and I'm going to be honest. Talk about mono and fluorocarbon. It's
so the one thing I like about fluorocarbon, there's a like and a dislike. I like because it is harder, so it doesn't coil like mono does, but it also sinks. So like what we're getting into now, when top water is really getting big, there's times where you're gonna, especially on those calm days, you're gonna want to twitch, and you're gonna let it sit. Well, if you're using long fluorocarbon leaders, that leader sinks down, so the next time you go to move it, it actually dives down. Whereas if you use a short piece of mono, about 5 inches, that lure will never do that. It'll stay right up, and when it, it's probably not that big a deal, but if it sits there and that fish comes up and looks at it and he's thinking about hitting it, as soon as it moves, if it does that, you're going to say, yeah, that ain't right.
not natural.
Yeah, that ain't right.
right.
And the other thing with top water, if you use a short leader, how many times have you come back where your hook's, it's foul hooked?
Right.
You use a short leader like that, it very rarely ever happens.
Yeah, I normally start out with like a
So you don't have to...
2-3 foot leader, and then by the time I change it, it's about that long.
That's if I'm fishing. That's the only time I use the short. Yeah. I don't want to have to retie leaders every third cast. I get it.
But I will say I do use mostly fluorocarbon leaders because of the reason you said. It doesn't coil up.
Yeah.
But for the average person, you know,
I don't think you'll ever know. I mean, and if anybody ever tells you that, you know, it's because the fish can't see it, I'm sorry. If I can put it in water and I can see it, I'm pretty sure fish can see it.
right.
So, you know, I'm not sure I buy that. The abrasion resistance, 100%.
And even then, they talk about abrasion resistance between mono and fluorocarbon, and how mono is a little more abrasion resistant. But if you start measuring diameters, the reason it's more abrasion resistant is
Well,
it's a larger diameter.
Yeah.
You know, it's not really that it's more.
Yeah. And I know, like I said, when, you know, my past life, when we did a lot of snook fishing, I always liked fluorocarbon better because typically you're using live bait. So if it gets it in deep, you know, 90% of the snook that cut you off, they don't cut you off with their gill plates. They cut you off because their mouth is like sandpaper.
Right.
So that fluorocarbon gives you maybe 3 or 4 more pulls on them before it breaks over that mono. You know, and a lot of times that's the difference in landing a 30-inch fish and not landing them.
Even then, you're really beefing up your litter weight.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
We're not
you are.
talking, you know,
No, I mean, typically
we're not talking 15, 20 pounds.
No, I was always at a minimum 30, and that's if the water was crystal clear.
30, 40.
Usually 40.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And up here, you don't, you know, with artificial, you can get away with mono a lot more because very rarely do they take it deep.
Right.
You know, because you're right on it when they hit. So typically you're hooking them in the mouth. So with a lure, you know, especially if you got a big topwater, you've got 3 inches, you know, between that line and that fish's mouth. You know?
Yeah, and a lot of people think, well, you're fishing around oysters or rocks, but let me tell you, if it goes across an
Yeah.
oyster, I don't care if you have
It don't matter.
10-pound braid or 20-pound fluoro hitting it, it's going to cut it.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and like wintertime, if I fish in the hole in a creek with some shrimp on a jig head, I'm not even gonna have a leader.
I would say you're better off going straight braid.
Yeah.
Yeah. Without a doubt.
So Alan Parrish says, I came into the live late. How are the winds going to be this coming week? Brutal.
Yeah.
Brutal.
Yeah. Just don't look. Just go.
Yeah. Either just go or just don't go.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things. There's not going to be. Well, maybe it's not going to be. You know, it's going to blow.
It's not going to be fun.
Yeah. And a lot of, you know, just like we were talking about earlier, with wind direction plays a huge part. You know, and yeah, if you get I mean, especially this time of year, you get a good hard south wind or a southwest. You know, southwest is a little hard up here just because the angle it blows, but you get a south or southeast. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, you're going to have to stake off and fish point to point. However, you know, it brings all that humidity in. It's low pressure, you know, warm air, warm water. It really, I think a good hard south wind in the spring makes fish eat. I really do. You know, it's a little tough to fish at times, but if you can do it, you typically have really good days.
So what do you like wind wise? You like it slick as glass out there?
Not probably about 10 to 15.
When I'm running out.
Yeah. Wintertime, I don't mind the wind is bad. I mean, just water temperature's cold and it's too bad. Like summertime, it definitely wants to wind. You know, when it gets slick as glass out there, it makes for a tough bite out there then. But summertime, I probably definitely want something around 10 to 15 where I got a drift going and throwing that popping cork out there. And usually you won't catch something as long as you got a drift out there.
Yeah, I like 10 to 15. Summertime, I like a 20.
Yeah.
Now, someone don't understand. You go out there and tell it, well, you're just sitting there. There's no wind. Fish aren't moving, and they're not going to cooperate until you get some breeze for you to move to catch them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this weekend, you know, Saturday's like mid 20 mile per hour gusts. Sundays mid 30s.
Yeah, I think Saturday morning's decent, but like say after
the
pick
front
up
looks
20,
good.
29 gusts.
Yeah.
I see 5 to 10 out of the north.
And we do have some rain coming early
Yeah.
next week.
I think Monday.
Yeah.
Yeah, Sunday night, Monday. Yeah, Monday's not going to be a day to be on the water.
Maybe we won't get 6 inches of rain.
I did skip a comment up here. I don't know if he's still watching. Let's see. Leaf Lundquist says all the fish are in Keaton. Everyone go that way. So that right there automatically tells you where the fish are.
Don't rat the foul though. Everybody knows where he's at.
Oh yeah, yeah. Anytime someone's
Spoken like a
deflecting
sure
it, yeah.
Nothing to see. Nothing to see.
All right, we got another question here from Mike Green. What would you say is the biggest mistake people make when starting out trying to sight fish redfish?
I would say getting too close. You try and trying to make the perfect cast. It just, you always, if you can see them in the water and you can actually look and you're close enough, if you're not in a skiff push pulling up on them, they know you're there. I mean, they're, it's just one of those things that,
Probably making too much noise.
yeah, you want to, I mean, if you're going out to specifically sight cast fish, you got to have, everything has to be set up right. You have to have, a good rod that you can throw a long ways.
Yeah.
Typically 10 to 15 pound test at the most on the reel, so you can cast a long ways. And I've always liked when I'm sight casting, the smaller the bait, the better. You want a quiet entry when it hits the water. And again, you want to cast either past them, to be able to let the bait come to them, let them find the bait again, and don't overwork it.
Yeah, like we're saying, bring the bait in front of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's probably, you hit on what I feel is the biggest mistake, because if you're sight casting, you get within range, I mean, you're obviously, if you're sight casting, you're already within range.
Yeah. Typically.
Now, a lot of the mistake is casting, trying to hit them. Like you said, cast past them, and most people want to overwork the bait.
Yeah.
And most of the time, I'm just going to cast past them and reel it.
Yeah. And when it gets to them, just shake.
Yep.
Just shake the rod. If it's a jig, if it's something like that, even if it's a top water, just get it near them and just make it quiver, and they will find it. And there's several types of sight fishing. You got this where you see 50 school of 50 redfish in front of you and they're moving. That's different from sneaking up on that tailor.
A single fish.
Completely different. Yeah. I mean, everything is different. You got 50 eyes to deal with. However, if you get one of those to bite, you're going to get 10 of them to bite.
Yeah, and I guess I was talking more about that
single fish.
Single fish.
Yeah.
I mean,
and that typically when people are talking about sight fishing, that's what they mean.
right.
I mean, if you see, I always tell, just, we all do it as guides, you'll be moving along and boom, you blow out 3 or 4 fish and they're swimming away and you see the head wake and, guys casting at them. It's like,
They're not going to eat.
yeah,
Typically.
don't buy. Yeah. About the time you say that, of course he blows up on it.
Yeah.
But yeah, typically if they're moving away from you, don't even bother, look for another fish, or let that one go away.
Most of the time you blow
down.
fish out like that, there's fish nearby.
Yeah, there's
that
other ones.
You haven't
Yeah.
spooked yet.
Yeah, and that fish will move up and settle down.
Right.
If you give him time. The sight fishing, the one thing is keep as much distance between the fish as you can and go slow. Just move very slow and just
With everything you do.
not
Not
even
just
your
the boat.
cast. You should never cast overhand. You should always be on the side, trying to sweep cast so everything's low. It's just it's a whole different animal. It's awesome when it works. It is.
Oh yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's frustrating.
And if you want a good experience sight fishing, look up Evan Snow with Appalachian Inshore Charters, Jay Carson Plug and Fly Charters. That's those guys' specialty.
Yeah.
If you're talking single fish, polling,
It is. It's a whole way of fishing onto itself for sure. I mean, it's a blast to do, and I love doing it when I'm by myself.
Yeah.
It's tough with clients though. You got to really have somebody that can.
yeah,
They can do it.
and it's not something you're gonna do with a boatload of people.
No, it's two people on the boat. You and somebody else typically.
Yeah. And another thing is, as far as accurate cast, leaving too much leader out there, you're not going to have as accurate of a cast, especially in the wind.
No.
You got to get that bait up closer to the tip, and
Yeah. Like I said, it's a whole way of fishing onto itself.
yeah. Jeff Lyle says, "Don't cast in the middle of the school unless they're fired up."
Yeah,
They're fired up,
unless you want to see them swim really fast.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's for sure.
All righty. Well, I think we covered a lot. Michael, how can they find you if they want to book a trip?
Find me on Facebook at Amen Charters LLC, or call me at 850-843-0352. You can call or text me there. I got email amancharters@yahoo.com too.
And Greg?
The best way to do now is go to econfinasportingclub.com. We'll have everything you need there.
All righty, and Real Epic Charters on all the social media, realepiccharters.com. And we appreciate y'all tuning in. We appreciate the questions, and we'll see you back next